Dust Gulch wasn't much to look at. Even the tumbleweeds seemed to hurry through, eager to escape its dusty grip. Buildings sagged like tired old men, their paint peeling under the relentless sun. The saloon, the Rusty Spur, was the grandest structure, but even it had seen better days, its swinging doors creaking a mournful tune in the dry wind. A single, gnarled tree stood sentinel on the edge of town, offering little shade and less comfort. The townsfolk were as weathered as the landscape. Their faces, etched with lines of hardship and disappointment, told tales of broken dreams and unfulfilled promises. Prospectors who hadn't struck gold, farmers whose crops had withered, and merchants whose shelves remained stubbornly full. They were all bound together by a shared sense of weariness. The air hung heavy with the scent of dust and despair. Children played listlessly in the dirt, their laughter muted, their games lacking the usual spark of youthful energy. Even the dogs seemed to drag their feet, their tails tucked low. Hope was a rare commodity in Dust Gulch, a forgotten memory whispered in hushed tones. The general store, owned by a gaunt man named Silas, was the heart of the town, though a weak and faltering one. Supplies were scarce, and prices were high. Silas, with his perpetually furrowed brow, seemed to carry the weight of the town's troubles on his narrow shoulders. He watched the townsfolk come and go, his eyes filled with a mixture of pity and resignation. The only splash of color in Dust Gulch came from Miss Tibbs's hat shop, a tiny, brightly painted building crammed with flamboyant hats that seemed utterly out of place. Miss Tibbs herself was a formidable woman, her sharp tongue and piercing gaze keeping the townsfolk in line. She was a stickler for rules and a staunch believer in tradition, and she didn't take kindly to outsiders. Sheriff Dugan, a burly man with a handlebar mustache and a perpetually scowling face, was the law in Dust Gulch. He was a man of few words and even fewer smiles, his authority maintained through a combination of intimidation and apathy. He mostly concerned himself with keeping the peace, which in Dust Gulch usually meant turning a blind eye to petty squabbles and occasional drunken brawls. Dust Gulch was a town on the edge, a place where dreams went to die and hopes struggled to survive. It was a town waiting for something to change, though few believed that anything ever would. The stage was set for a story of hardship, prejudice, and the unexpected bloom of compassion in the most unlikely of places. Into this weary landscape, a wagon rattled, its wheels protesting with every turn. It was old, patched together with scraps of wood and hope, pulled by a tired-looking mule named Bess. In the wagon sat Lena and her 3 children, a boy, Caleb, around 10 years old, his eyes already holding a world of worry, a girl, Sarah, about 7, clutching a worn-out doll, and the youngest, little Samuel, barely 4, his face smudged with dirt and his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Lena's face was etched with lines of exhaustion, but her eyes held a spark of determination. She wore a simple dress, faded and patched, but clean. She held her head high, despite the weight of her circumstances. She had traveled far, seeking a place where she and her children could find some semblance of peace, some respite from the hardships that had plagued them. They arrived in Dust Gulch as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the desolate landscape. The children stared wide-eyed at the sagging buildings and the weathered faces of the townsfolk. Caleb instinctively moved closer to his mother, his hand finding hers. Lena guided Bess through the dusty streets, searching for a place to stop, a place to rest. The townsfolk watched them with suspicion, their eyes narrowed, their faces unreadable. Miss Tibbs emerged from her hat shop, her expression disapproving, her lips pursed. Sheriff Dugan leaned against the doorframe of his office, his gaze cold and assessing. Lena finally stopped the wagon near the edge of town, beneath the gnarled tree. She helped the children down, her movements slow and deliberate. Sarah clung to her doll, her eyes darting nervously around. Samuel stumbled, and Lena scooped him up in her arms, her touch gentle and reassuring. "We'll be all right," she whispered to them, her voice soft but firm. "We'll find a way." But as she looked around at the desolate town and the unwelcoming faces of its inhabitants, a flicker of doubt crossed her eyes. Dust Gulch offered little promise, but it was all she had. For now, it was their refuge, their sanctuary, their last hope. They were strangers in a strange land, their fate uncertain, their future hanging in the balance. They were seeking not riches, but simply a place to belong, a place to call home. And in Dust Gulch, that seemed like a very tall order indeed. Weston Creed lived on the outskirts of Dust Gulch, his ranch a solitary island in a sea of scrubland. He wasn't a man of many words, preferring the company of his cattle to the chatter of the townsfolk. His life was simple, dictated by the rhythm of the seasons and the needs of his animals. He was a man of the land, weathered and strong, his face tanned by the sun and etched with the lines of a life lived outdoors. From his porch, he had a clear view of the road leading into town. He'd seen Lena's wagon arrive, the tired mule, the worn clothes of the children, the weary determination in Lena's eyes. He watched as they settled beneath the gnarled tree, the children huddling close to their mother, seeking comfort and reassurance. Weston wasn't one to interfere in other people's business. He'd learned long ago that everyone had their own path to walk, their own burdens to bear. But something about Lena and her children stirred something within him, a flicker of compassion he hadn't felt in years. He saw the way the townsfolk watched them, their faces filled with suspicion and disapproval. He knew what it was like to be an outsider, to be judged and scorned. He'd faced his own share of prejudice and hardship in his life, and he recognized the same struggles in Lena's eyes. He sat on his porch, his gaze fixed on the small family beneath the tree. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land. The air grew cooler, and Weston could see Lena wrapping her arms around her children, trying to shield them from the chill. He thought of his own mother, long gone, and the sacrifices she had made for him. He remembered her kindness, her unwavering love, her fierce determination to protect him from the harsh realities of the world. He stood up, his decision made. He couldn't stand by and watch Lena and her children struggle without offering a helping hand. He knew it wouldn't be easy. The townsfolk wouldn't approve, but he couldn't ignore the prompting in his heart, the feeling that he was meant to do something, anything, to ease their burden. He walked towards his barn, his footsteps firm and resolute. He knew what he had to do. He would offer them what he could, a simple act of kindness in a world that seemed to have forgotten the meaning of the word. He would offer them food. Weston emerged from his barn, carrying a basket laden with food. There was a loaf of freshly baked bread, still warm from the oven, a jar of homemade jam, a hunk of cheese, and a handful of apples. Simple fare, but enough to fill their empty bellies and offer a moment of comfort. He walked slowly towards the edge of town, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust. As he approached, Lena looked up, her eyes wary. She stood protectively in front of her children, her body tense. She didn't know this man, didn't know his intentions. She learned to be cautious, to trust no one. Weston stopped a few feet away, his gaze gentle. He didn't speak, didn't want to frighten them. He simply held out the basket, offering it as a silent gesture of goodwill. Caleb, the eldest, stepped forward cautiously, his eyes fixed on Weston's face. He saw no threat there, only kindness. He reached out and took the basket, his fingers brushing against Weston's hand. "Thank you," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. Lena relaxed slightly, her shoulders slumping. She stepped forward, her eyes meeting Weston's. "We don't have much to offer in return," she said, her voice soft. Weston shook his head. "It's a gift," he said, his voice gruff but kind. "No need for anything in return." He watched as Lena and the children gathered around the basket, their faces lighting up as they saw the food. Sarah reached for an apple, her eyes wide with delight. Samuel clapped his hands, his face beaming. Lena broke off a piece of bread and handed it to Weston. "Share with us," she said, her eyes filled with gratitude. Weston hesitated for a moment, then accepted the bread. He took a bite, the simple flavor surprisingly satisfying. He sat down on a nearby rock, watching as Lena and the children ate, their hunger evident in their every bite. There were no words spoken, but a silent bond formed between them, a connection forged through shared hardship and a simple act of kindness. Weston felt a warmth spread through him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. He realized that he had given them more than just food. He had given them hope. And in return, they had given him something he had long thought lost, a sense of purpose, a reason to care. The sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, casting a warm glow on the unlikely gathering beneath the gnarled tree. In Dust Gulch, a small act of compassion had sparked a glimmer of hope, a promise of something better to come. News travels fast in a small town, especially news that disrupts the established order. By the next morning, everyone in Dust Gulch knew about Weston Creed's act of kindness towards Lena and her children, and most of them did not approve. Miss Tibbs, her face pursed in disapproval, spread the gossip like wildfire. "Imagine," she huffed to Silas at the general store, "giving away good food to those vagrants. It only encourages them." Silas, ever cautious, simply nodded, not wanting to incur Miss Tibbs's wrath. But inside, he felt a twinge of sympathy for Lena and her children. He'd seen hardship in his own life, and he knew what it was like to be hungry. Sheriff Dugan, leaning against the doorframe of his office, watched Lena and her children with a steely gaze. He didn't like outsiders, didn't like disruptions to the peace. He saw Lena as a potential troublemaker, a drain on the town's already scarce resources. "She needs to move on," he muttered to himself. "We can't afford to take care of strays." The townsfolk began to whisper and point, their faces etched with suspicion and disapproval. Lena felt their stares, their judgment, like a physical weight pressing down on her. She tried to ignore them, to focus on her children, but it was difficult. One woman, Martha, whose husband had lost his leg in a mining accident, even confronted Lena directly. "You can't expect us to just take you in," she said, her voice sharp. "We have our own problems to worry about." Lena stood her ground, her chin held high. "I'm not asking for charity," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm just looking for a place to work, a place to build a life for my children." But Martha wasn't swayed. "This isn't the place," she said. "There's nothing here for you." Lena felt a surge of anger, but she suppressed it. She knew that arguing wouldn't do any good. She simply turned and walked away, her children following close behind. The message was clear. Lena and her children were not welcome in Dust Gulch. They were outsiders, burdens, unwelcome additions to a town already struggling to survive. The initial glimmer of hope sparked by Weston's kindness was quickly fading, replaced by the harsh reality of prejudice and disdain. The road ahead seemed even more difficult, the challenges even more daunting. Dust Gulch was proving to be a far more hostile place than she had imagined. Weston, hearing the whispers and sensing the growing hostility towards Lena and her children, decided he couldn't remain silent any longer. He knew the town's prejudice stemmed from fear and a scarcity of resources, but that didn't make it right. He saddled his horse, a sturdy Appaloosa named Paint, and rode into town, his jaw set with determination. He found Lena drawing water from the well, her children playing quietly nearby. The townsfolk gave her a wide berth, their faces averted, their whispers following her like shadows. Weston dismounted and approached her, his presence drawing the attention of everyone nearby. "Lena," he said, his voice clear and strong, cutting through the murmurs. "I want to apologize for the way these folks are treating you." Lena looked up, surprised. "It's all right, Mr. Creed," she said, her voice resigned. "I'm used to it." "It's not all right," Weston insisted. He turned to face the townsfolk, his gaze sweeping across their faces. "Lena and her children are good people. They deserve to be treated with respect, just like anyone else." Miss Tibbs stepped forward, her eyes flashing with anger. "They're vagrants, Weston," she snapped. "They're nothing but trouble." "They're human beings, Miss Tibbs," Weston retorted, his voice rising. "And they need our help." Sheriff Dugan emerged from his office, his hand resting on his gun. "Creed, you're stirring up trouble," he warned. "This ain't your concern." "It is my concern," Weston replied, his voice unwavering. I won't stand by and watch good people be treated unfairly. He looked back at Lena, his eyes filled with compassion. Lena, you and your children are welcome on my ranch. There's plenty of room and plenty of work if you want it. The townsfolk gasped, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. Miss Tibbs sputtered with indignation, and Sheriff Dugan's hand tightened on his gun. Lena's eyes filled with tears. Mr. Creed, I don't know what to say, she stammered. You've already done so much. Say yes, Weston urged, a faint smile playing on his lips. Let me help you. The tension in the air was thick, the silence broken only by the gentle breeze rustling through the trees. The fate of Lena and her children, and perhaps the future of Dust Gulch itself, hung in the balance. Weston had taken a stand, defying the town's prejudice and offering Lena a lifeline. But the battle was far from over. The storm was brewing, and the winds of change were beginning to blow. Lena hesitated, torn between her gratitude and her fear. She didn't want to cause trouble for Weston, didn't want to drag him into her problems. But the thought of a safe haven, a place where her children could finally feel secure, was too tempting to resist. Yes, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Yes, Mr. Creed, we accept your offer. A collective gasp swept through the town. Miss Tibbs shrieked, Sheriff Dugan scowled, and the townsfolk muttered amongst themselves. Weston ignored them, his gaze fixed on Lena, his eyes filled with warmth and reassurance. Good, he said, a smile spreading across his face. Then let's get you settled in. He helped Lena onto the wagon, then lifted the children up beside her. He climbed onto Paint, leading the wagon out of town, leaving the stunned townsfolk behind. As they rode towards Weston's ranch, Lena felt a sense of relief wash over her. For the first time in a long time, she felt safe, protected. She looked at Weston, his strong, weathered face etched with kindness, and a feeling of gratitude welled up inside her. But their troubles were far from over. Sheriff Dugan, fueled by Miss Tibbs's venom and the town's collective disapproval, was determined to get rid of Lena and her children. He saw them as a threat to the town's stability, a challenge to his authority. The next day, he rode out to Weston's ranch, his face grim. He found Weston and Lena working in the garden, the children playing nearby. Creed, he said, his voice cold and hard, I'm ordering you to send Lena and her family out of town. They're not welcome here. Weston stood up, his eyes narrowing. They're under my protection, Dugan, he said, his voice low and dangerous. And I won't let you touch them. You're defying the law, Creed, Dugan warned, his hand resting on his gun. There's no law that says I can't help someone in need, Weston retorted. And I'm not afraid of you, Dugan. The tension between the two men was palpable, the air thick with animosity. The children stopped playing, sensing the danger. Lena stepped forward, her face pale with fear. Please, Mr. Dugan, she pleaded. We don't want any trouble. We just want a place to live. This isn't your decision, Lena, Dugan snapped. This is between me and Creed. He turned back to Weston, his eyes filled with malice. I'm giving you one last chance, Creed. Send them away, or you'll regret it. Weston stood his ground, his jaw set with determination. They're staying, he said, his voice unwavering. And if you try to force them out, you'll have to go through me. The stage was set for a showdown, a battle between compassion and prejudice, between justice and the law. The storm clouds were gathering, and Dust Gulch was about to be torn apart. The standoff hung heavy in the air, the silence broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant rumble of thunder. Dark clouds gathered overhead, mirroring the storm brewing within Dust Gulch. Weston and Dugan stood face to face, two titans locked in a battle of wills. Caleb, sensing the danger, stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Sheriff Dugan's gun. He moved in front of his younger siblings, as if to protect them. Samuel, clinging to Lena's leg, began to cry. Suddenly, little Samuel broke free from Lena and ran towards Weston, his small arms outstretched. Papa, he cried, his voice filled with desperation. Don't let the bad man hurt us. The word Papa hung in the air, silencing everyone. Dugan's hand froze on his gun. Lena gasped, her eyes wide with shock. Weston's face softened, his heart swelling with a warmth he had never known before. He knelt down, scooping Samuel into his arms. "I won't let anyone hurt you, son," he said, his voice choked with emotion. He looked at Lena, his eyes filled with a mixture of love and apology. Lena's heart melted. She knew that Samuel's outburst was innocent, a child's desperate plea for protection. But it had revealed a truth that had been slowly growing between them. A connection, a bond, a sense of family. The townsfolk watched in stunned silence, their faces a mixture of confusion and awe. Miss Tibbs's mouth hung open, and even Sheriff Dugan seemed taken aback. The moment had changed everything. It was no longer just about Weston protecting Lena and her children. It was about a family, a bond that had been forged in hardship and strengthened by compassion. And it was a bond that Weston was determined to defend, no matter the cost. He stood up, still holding Samuel in his arms, his gaze fixed on Sheriff Dugan. "They're my family now, Dugan," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "And I'll protect them with my life." The thunder rumbled louder, and a bolt of lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the scene with an eerie glow. The storm was about to break, and Dust Gulch was about to be changed forever. The word "Papa" had shattered the town's prejudice, revealing the power of love and the strength of family. But it had also ignited a fire, a conflict that would test the very soul of Dust Gulch. Sheriff Dugan, taken aback by Weston's declaration and the palpable bond between him and the children, hesitated. The storm raged around them, the wind howling like a banshee, the rain lashing down in torrents. He knew that trying to force the issue now would only make things worse. "All right, Creed," he said, his voice grudging. "They can stay for now, but if they cause any trouble, they're gone, and you'll be held responsible." He turned and walked away, his shoulders slumped, his authority diminished. The townsfolk watched him go, their faces a mixture of relief and disappointment. The showdown had been averted, but the underlying tension remained. Weston, still holding Samuel, turned to Lena, his eyes filled with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle. Lena nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Weston," she whispered, using his first name for the first time. "Thank you for everything." He smiled, his heart overflowing with love. He knew that he had made the right decision, that he had found something truly special in Lena and her children. "Come on," he said. "Let's get out of this rain." He led Lena and the children back to the ranch house, the storm raging around them. Inside the cozy cabin, with a fire crackling in the hearth, they found refuge from the storm. Weston wrapped the children in blankets, and Lena made them hot chocolate. They sat together, huddled close, the sound of the rain drumming against the roof. As the storm raged outside, a sense of peace settled over them. They were safe, they were together, and they were a family. The word "Papa" had changed everything, solidifying their bond and giving them a new sense of purpose. But the storm was more than just a physical event. It was a symbol of the turmoil within Dust Gulch, the conflict between compassion and prejudice, between the old ways and the new. And it was a reminder that their troubles were far from over. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and renewed. But the scars remained, the divisions within Dust Gulch still deep. Weston knew that he had a long road ahead of him, that he would have to fight to protect his family and to change the hearts and minds of the townsfolk. But he was ready. He had found something worth fighting for, something worth protecting. He had found a family, and he would do whatever it took to keep them safe and together. The sun rose, casting its golden rays upon Dust Gulch, a promise of a new beginning, a new hope for the future. But the battle for the soul of the town had just begun. The days that followed were filled with hard work and quiet joy. Weston taught Caleb how to tend the cattle, how to mend fences, how to read the land. Lena helped Weston in the garden, her touch bringing life to the parched soil. Sarah followed Lena everywhere, helping with chores and learning about the healing power of herbs. And Samuel, always by Weston's side, became his shadow, his little helper, his son. Weston embraced his role as a father, his heart swelling with a love he never knew existed. He told the children stories, taught them how to ride horses, and protected them from the harsh realities of the world. He felt a sense of purpose he had never known before, a reason to wake up each morning and face the challenges ahead. Lena, watching Weston with her children, felt a warmth spread through her. She had never met a man like him, a man who was so kind, so strong, so willing to give everything for his family. She began to fall in love with him, not just for his kindness, but for his unwavering spirit, his fierce loyalty, and his gentle heart. But the townsfolk continued to whisper and stare, their prejudice slowly eroding but still present. Miss Tibbs continued to spread gossip, and Sheriff Dugan kept a watchful eye on Weston and his family, waiting for them to slip up. One day, while Weston was in town buying supplies, Miss Tibbs confronted Lena. "You think you've won, don't you?" she sneered. "You think you've charmed Weston Creed and made him your fool." Lena stood her ground, her eyes flashing with anger. "I haven't charmed anyone, Miss Tibbs," she retorted. "Weston is a good man, and he's helping us because it's the right thing to do." "He's blind," Miss Tibbs insisted. "He doesn't see what you really are." "And what is that?" Lena challenged. "A gold digger," Miss Tibbs spat. "A schemer who's only after his money." Lena slapped her, the sound echoing through the quiet street. Miss Tibbs staggered back, her face red with rage. "Don't you ever speak about Weston that way again," Lena said, her voice trembling with anger. "He's a better person than you'll ever be." News of the slap spread quickly through Dust Gulch, further dividing the town. Some sided with Miss Tibbs, condemning Lena for her violence. Others secretly admired Lena's courage, her willingness to defend Weston's honor. The battle for the soul of Dust Gulch continued, the lines between right and wrong becoming increasingly blurred. The storm within the town was far from over, and the future remained uncertain. But one thing was clear. The bond between Weston, Lena, and the children was stronger than ever, a beacon of hope in a world of darkness. The air grew heavy, the sky darkening with an ominous gray. A strange stillness settled over Dust Gulch, a silence broken only by the distant rumble of thunder. The animals grew restless, the cattle huddling together, the dogs whining nervously. Even the tumbleweeds seemed to sense the impending doom, clinging to the ground, refusing to be swept away by the gathering storm. Weston, sensing the change in the atmosphere, gathered his family close. He knew that a storm was brewing, not just in the sky, but within the town itself. The tensions between those who supported him and Lena and those who clung to their prejudice were reaching a breaking point. He secured the ranch house, boarding up the windows, gathering supplies, preparing for the worst. Lena helped him, her face etched with worry, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Caleb and Sarah, sensing their parents' anxiety, tried to be brave, but their fear was evident in their wide eyes and trembling hands. Samuel, too young to understand the danger, clung to Weston's leg, his innocent presence a reminder of what they were fighting for. As the first drops of rain began to fall, Sheriff Dugan rode out to Weston's ranch, his face grim. He wasn't there to offer help, but to issue a warning. "Creed," he said, his voice hard, "I'm telling you to keep your family inside. This storm is going to be a bad one, and I don't want any trouble." "We'll be fine, Dugan," Weston replied, his voice defiant. "We can take care of ourselves." "Don't say I didn't warn you," Dugan said, turning his horse around. "And Creed, if anything happens to them, it'll be on your head." He rode back to town, leaving Weston and his family to face the storm alone. The rain intensified, the wind howling like a banshee, the lightning illuminating the sky with flashes of eerie light. As the storm raged around them, Weston gathered his family in the main room of the ranch house. He lit a fire in the hearth, its warmth and light providing a sense of comfort and security. He told the children stories, trying to distract them from the storm, but their fear was palpable. Lena sat beside him, her hand resting on his. She knew that the storm was more than just a physical event, that it was a test of their strength, a trial by fire. She looked at Weston, his strong, weathered face etched with determination, and she knew that they could face anything as long as they had each other. The storm raged on, the wind and rain battering the ranch house, testing its foundations. But inside, a family huddled together, their bond stronger than ever, their love a beacon of hope in the darkness. The storm had arrived, and Dust Gulch was about to be tested. As the night wore on, the storm intensified. The wind howled like a hungry wolf, rattling the windows and shaking the very foundations of the ranch house. The rain lashed down in sheets, blurring the landscape and turning the surrounding fields into a muddy swamp. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the scene with an eerie, otherworldly glow. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the ranch house. A tree, weakened by the storm, had fallen, smashing through the roof of the barn. Weston knew that he had to act quickly to save the animals inside. "Lena, stay here with the children," he said, his voice urgent. "I have to check on the animals." "I'm going with you," Lena insisted, her eyes filled with determination. "I can help." Weston hesitated, knowing the danger, but he couldn't deny the strength and resilience in Lena's eyes. He nodded, grabbing his coat and a lantern. "Caleb, you're in charge," he said, his voice serious. "Keep your brother and sister safe." Weston and Lena braved the storm, battling their way to the barn. The wind and rain buffeted them, making it difficult to see, to breathe, to even stand upright. When they reached the barn, they found the animals huddled together, terrified. The roof had collapsed in several places, leaving them exposed to the elements. Working together, Weston and Lena managed to lead the animals to safety, herding them into a smaller, more secure part of the barn. They worked tirelessly, their bodies aching, their spirits flagging, but their determination unwavering. Back at the ranch house, Caleb did his best to comfort his younger siblings. He told them stories, sang them songs, and held them close, trying to shield them from the storm. Sarah, despite her fear, helped him, bringing blankets and hot chocolate, tending to Samuel's needs. They were a team, a family, facing the storm together. Finally, after hours of struggle, the storm began to subside. The wind died down, the rain lessened, and the clouds began to break, revealing patches of blue sky. Weston and Lena, exhausted but relieved, returned to the ranch house, their faces etched with weariness but their hearts filled with pride. They had faced the storm together, and they had survived. As the sun began to rise, casting its golden rays upon the ravaged landscape, Weston gathered his family in his arms. They had faced the storm, both literally and metaphorically, and they had emerged stronger, more resilient, more united than ever before. The storm had tested them, but it had also revealed their true strength, their unwavering love, and their unbreakable bond. They were a family, and they could face anything as long as they faced it together. The morning after the storm dawned bright and clear. The air was fresh and clean, washed free of the dust and grime that had plagued Dust Gulch for so long. The sun shone brightly, casting its golden rays upon the ravaged landscape, highlighting the damage, but also illuminating the resilience of the land and its people. As Weston and Lena surveyed the damage to the ranch, they felt a sense of gratitude wash over them. The ranch house had survived, the animals were safe, and their family was intact. They had faced the storm together, and they had emerged stronger, more united than ever before. But the storm had also left its mark on Dust Gulch. Several buildings had been damaged, and the bridge leading into town had been washed away. The townsfolk were shaken, their spirits low. Weston knew that he couldn't stand by and watch his neighbors suffer. He gathered his family and rode into town, offering his help and resources. At first, the townsfolk were hesitant, their prejudice still lingering. But as they saw Weston and Lena working tirelessly to clear debris, to repair buildings, to care for the injured, their hearts began to soften. Caleb and Sarah helped too, their youthful energy and unwavering optimism inspiring others to join in. Even Samuel, with his innocent smile and boundless enthusiasm, brought a ray of sunshine to the devastated town. Slowly but surely, The townsfolk began to come together, setting aside their differences and working side by side to rebuild their community. Miss Tibbs, her face still bearing the mark of Lena's slap, surprised everyone by organizing a soup kitchen, providing warm meals for those who had lost their homes. Sheriff Dugan, his authority diminished, but his sense of responsibility rekindled, helped to coordinate the relief efforts, ensuring that everyone received the help they needed. As the days passed, Dust Gulch began to heal, both physically and emotionally. The storm had washed away the old prejudices, revealing the true spirit of the town, a spirit of compassion, resilience, and community. Weston and Lena watched with pride as Dust Gulch transformed, as neighbors helped neighbors, as strangers became friends. They had come to Dust Gulch seeking refuge, but they had found something far more valuable: a home, a family, and a community that had finally learned the true meaning of love and acceptance. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sense of renewal and the promise of a new life for Weston, Lena, and their children, and for the entire town of Dust Gulch. The sun shone brightly, a beacon of hope illuminating the path to a brighter future. With the community rebuilding and old prejudices fading, Weston and Lena found themselves drawn even closer. The shared experiences of hardship and triumph had forged an unbreakable bond between them, a love that was as strong and enduring as the land itself. One evening, as the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Weston took Lena's hand and led her to the top of a small hill overlooking the ranch. The children, sensing the special moment, trailed behind, their eyes filled with anticipation. "Lena," Weston said, his voice filled with emotion, "you and the children have changed my life. You've given me a reason to care, a reason to fight, a reason to love again." He knelt down, pulling a small, silver ring from his pocket. "Will you marry me, Lena? Will you be my wife, my partner, my love, forever?" Tears streamed down Lena's face as she nodded, her heart overflowing with joy. "Yes, Weston," she whispered. "Yes, I will." The children cheered, their voices echoing through the valley. Weston slipped the ring onto Lena's finger, a symbol of their commitment, their love, and their new beginning. They were married a few weeks later, in a simple ceremony beneath the gnarled tree where they had first met. The entire town of Dust Gulch attended, their faces filled with smiles and goodwill. Even Miss Tibbs, her face still bearing the faint mark of Lena's slap, offered her congratulations, a sign that the old prejudices had finally been laid to rest. Sheriff Dugan, his authority restored but his heart softened, gave Lena away, a symbol of the town's acceptance and forgiveness. As Weston and Lena exchanged vows, their eyes met, their hearts entwined. They knew that their journey wouldn't be easy, that there would be challenges ahead, but they also knew that they could face anything as long as they had each other. And so, Weston and Lena began to build a life together, a life filled with love, laughter, and compassion. They fostered a community based on those values, welcoming strangers, helping those in need, and treating everyone with respect and kindness. Dust Gulch, once a desolate and struggling town, transformed into a beacon of hope, a place where dreams could come true, where families could thrive, and where love could conquer all. Weston and Lena had found their happy ending, not just for themselves, but for the entire town of Dust Gulch. And as they looked out at their community, their family, their future, they knew that they had finally found their place in the world, their purpose in life, and their happily ever after. The end.